Thank you for tuning into this week's episode of the Rising Laterally podcast. This is Arjun Sachdev.
And this is Jay Ballou. We hope you find something here that offers you new meaning or a fresh perspective.
If you do, we encourage you to give it life.
Be bold.
Experiment.
And most importantly, bring it into the interactions with the people you surround yourself with.
And see what happens.
Today, we're very happy to have Mike Schauch on the podcast with us. Mike is an incredibly busy guy. He's got a great career in financial services, but he's also an avid mountain climber and a member of the Explorers Club. And he's a new author. Mike wrote the recently released A Story of Karma, Finding Love and Truth in the Lost Valley of the Himalaya. And that's what we're here to talk about today. The memoir chronicles Mike and his wife Chantal's travels to Nepal, and what started as an expedition in search of an elusive, unknown mountain actually evolved into something much more than that, ultimately a story of altruism, serendipity, and human connection. And it was a story that changed the trajectory of both Mike and Chantal's lives forever. So we're very excited to talk about it. Mike, thanks so much for being on the show with us.
No, thank you. Thank you for having me on the show.
So maybe we can start with discussing your passion for mountain climbing. It's been a lifelong passion of yours, and it's certainly a fascinating passion. Maybe you can tell us about what you find so enchanting about the mountains and being among them.
Yeah, well, I guess my relationship with the mountains has changed or evolved over the years. And I've always been plugged into nature, kind of lived around nature. My father, when we were young, my sister and I, when we were younger, he would take us in one of those camper vans, with the pop tops. And we would travel, camp throughout the United States and different national parks and through Canada, the Rockies. And so that always gave me a very deep presence into nature. And we'd always be, or most of the time, we'd be around these big mountains. And so I'd always have this kind of inspiration and just, kind of interest in them. And so when I was older in my teenage years, I'd love hiking and getting out into nature, that side of things. But I remember this one gentleman I met, and we were on a hike one time, and he said, "I'd love to take you up a mountain." And I think I was 16 years old or 17 years old at that time. And I said, yeah, I had no idea what that meant, but I said, this sounds awesome. And so he lent me his crampons and his ice axe and his harness, and off we went up this mountain. And I remember we were moving for about 4 or 5 hours. We got onto this really steep sort of icy snow slope, and he said, just keep kicking in with your crampons, keep digging in with your ice axe. And so we were moving up in tandem. And all I could think about was just don't fall. And he said, if you do fall, just put, the pointy end of your ice axe in. And so I was just thinking, and then all of a sudden I stopped at one point just to catch my breath. And I remember looking to my left and looking to my right, and it was just pure whiteness, just pure sort of icy whiteness glittering in the sun. The sun was just coming up over the ridgeline. And I remember looking over my shoulder, and on the horizon were these kind of like purplish orange hues of the sun coming up over these distant peaks. And in that one moment, I thought, this is it. There's this world up here that we have no idea exists, other than when we come up here to kind of play for these brief moments in the mountains. But that for me was it. I said, you know what, mountaineering, mountain climbing, getting out in the mountains, this is my passion. This is who I am. And from then on, I just full intensity, just dove right into it, and I've never looked back.
That's so cool. Yeah, I can see that being a portal into another universe. No one really has the access to that world except for the few people that are willing to make the effort and take the risk and get up there. So I can imagine how special it feels to be in sort of rarefied air like that, literally.
yeah, totally.
That's awesome.
And there's a feeling of like when you are on a mountainside and the sun is rising, it's a unique experience. I had the pleasure of doing that actually in Bali. We did a morning like mountain hike. We got up at 2:00 and went up Mount Batur just to catch the sunrise. And so when you're describing that story, I'm like, I know exactly what you're talking about when that light is coming up and you're like, wow, we are up here. And it's awe-inspiring.
For sure. Yeah. And I think it's that it kind of inspires that deep connection with, with our higher senses, right? I think it kind of inspires what we're meant to be as humans. And being in kind of the comfort of our homes or in the cities, or we've tried to build this lifestyle of being comfortable now, I think it kind of reduces our connection to those senses. So I think the mountains really are a way to tap into that again, to tap into who we are, the depths of what it means to be human.
Absolutely. Yeah. At one point in the book, you talk about feeling like you're a part of nature when you're up there, which I thought was a really interesting way of articulating it, that kind of return back to a more natural state.
For sure, for sure. Yeah, and I guess you could say my relationship, has changed over time. When I was younger, it was all about summits and climbing the mountain just for the adrenaline or for the intensity of it. Now, that I'm older, I'm 40. I just feel like the relationship with mountains is stronger than ever, but it's not so much about the intensity of it. It's more so about just being in that presence and being out there in that environment. If I'm with people, it's about the people I'm with, the company. It's not so much about this ego-driven pursuit. It's just about having that again, that connection and that balance with the natural surroundings.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what originally took you to Nepal was actually a search for the elusive pyramid mountain that you had first encountered in a photograph. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about how you came across it and why it was enough to motivate you to go halfway across the world in search of it.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, for as long as I can remember, I've wanted to go to Nepal and to the Himalaya, and I don't know why. It just is this deep connection that was always inside of me. Call it over romantic or dramatic, I don't know, but it was there. And so I remember one Christmas, my sister, she gave me this book. It was a Lonely Planet book called Trekking in the Himalaya of Nepal. And it was the best present I'd ever received. And I remember getting it and just kind of tearing through the pages and seeing pictures of, the Nepali people, the culture, the places, the mountains, little dotted out routes that I didn't, know the names. The names were foreign to me at the time. And all I could think about was just to run out of the house with that Lonely Planet. I was still dressed in my pajamas, but I just wanted to go out and just go to Nepal at once. And yeah,
Next
and then
flight.
yeah, but like life, in so many ways, life got in the way, and I could never really decide what I wanted to do in Nepal. Did I want to go on the Annapurna circuit? Did I want to go to Everest Base Camp? Did I want to climb a peak? Which peak? And on top of that, I never really had the time because I was working on building my career, and so I didn't have the time to take that big chunk of time off or the money. And so it wasn't until my early 30s that I finally had this opportunity to go. My wife Chantal and I, we had just come back we led two kind of expeditions, one up Kilimanjaro in Tanzania, and then another one up Pico de Orizaba in Mexico. And we just come back. We met this gentleman. He had just come back from a trip from the Himalaya, and we were talking about Nepal and just this feeling that I had. And he said, I got to tell you about this place. I got to tell you about the Lost Valley of Narfu. And I said, okay, well, you had me at Lost Valley, but yeah, let's talk about it. And he said, here's this place. It's been closed off to the outside world for generations. It just was recently opened. This is back in 2011. And he said, yeah, I mean, if you want to have an experience in the Himalaya, check out these photos. And he started showing me the photos, and the photos brought me right back to that Lonely Planet book that I had been given by my sister. And then I thought, this is it. This is the place I'm meant to go to. And Chantal and I immediately, we looked at each other and we said, okay, we're going. And then I came across this picture of this pyramid mountain. And for me, that was it. As a mountaineering fanatic, from its southwest aspect, it was just this perfect pyramid, snow and ice, just the beauty of it, just unreal. And some mountains do that to me. They just spark an interest in my very heart. And so I thought, okay, it's time for me to go to Nepal now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's something about being so drawn to something through a picture that is fascinating to me. Like that feeling that you must have had, like you truly felt like your heart was being pulled in that direction. And so I'm bringing that up because it was so strong that you literally started planning your life around it and how you're going to get to it. And I think that's
Yeah.
fascinating because it's like, just a reminder that, if you are feeling something, if you're like kind of feeling something in your gut, you should pursue that.
For sure. Yeah, for sure. It was, and especially when it's something that aligns so well, right? And we'll get into, I guess, talking about alignment and synchronicities and all of that, because it just kept happening more. The more we went into Nepal, the more we went into the mountains, the more these synchronicities just kept spiraling open and more open. And I should mention that the primary objective, yes, I had the objective of climbing the mountain, but the other objective was that Chantal and I, we learned that these people in this valley, now that it had been opened, they were going to be experiencing a lot of change and cultural change with tourists going in there and whatnot. So we thought, well, let's put a little team together of artists and we'll try and learn and observe from the people there and kind of capture a moment in time through these different lenses. So we had a photographer, we had a musician, and we had a nature artist, and Chantal and I would be doing some filming. But yeah, so we went in with like a little team into this lost valley.
That's really cool. Very, very cool. Yeah, maybe you can tell us about how that crew came together. And it was kind of an interesting medley of different people. Everyone, I think had their own kind of connection with that area and their own reason for wanting to make a trek like that. So maybe you can just tell us a little bit about who the crew was.
Yeah, for sure. We had, if you put us in a line, it would look like a total mixed bag of,
Yeah.
But we had this cowboy, Calgarian cowboy from Calgary, Canada, and he was wearing this big, brown cowboy hat and had this handlebar mustache. He was a biologist and a nature artist, and then we had this musician who's kind of like this sort of new age hippie with his goatee and purple bandana wrapped his long golden hair wrapped in a purple bandana, and then we had this Polish professor, a geomorphology professor, photographer, and then Chantal and I, we were kind of wearing our sports wear, like our trim fitting, athletic wear, and so maybe in North America we'd look like a total mashup, but in Kathmandu, where everything is a spectrum of color and light and sound, we kind of fit right in.
That's awesome.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you described the squalor and abject poverty you witnessed in Kathmandu with, I think, really striking detail. Honestly, a lot of it was pretty difficult to read, and there was this interesting juxtaposition, as you outline it, between the beautiful temples and the holy Buddha sites, and then the sewage-laden Bagmati River and the streets that in some areas were overflowing with garbage. And you write, I felt like I was stuck between two worlds, one of death, disease, poverty, and suffering, the other of life, beauty, color, joy, and transcendence. I'm just wondering how, in the moment, you were able to make some sort of internal sense of that juxtaposition.
Yeah, no, that was a pretty profound moment. It was, for anyone who's been to that particular part of Kathmandu, the Pashupatinath, it's a Hindu temple. And the reason why people go there is essentially, for the dead, right? The people who are dying, they go there, they burn the bodies on these pyres. And so you get there, you see these burning bodies, but you also see people who are very sick with different kinds of flesh-eating diseases and whatnot. They're kind of sitting there. And then you have these richly golden kind of temples and fine architecture and just beautiful, places. And then you have like little girls who are wading through the river because they shovel all the ashes from the burnt bodies into the river with any trinket that the person was burnt with. And so these girls were like waded barefoot, trying to find any trinkets. And then you have, somebody defecating in the river upstream, and you have a family having a picnic downstream, and then you have tourists, snapping photos. And I mean, just all of it kind of combined in one scene was almost too much. It's just
absolutely.
But yeah, it was life and death and sickness and beauty, and everything was just right there, right in your face. So definitely an eye opener for I think, what we were going to experience, even going deeper into this valley.
It's definitely one of the luxuries of living in North America is not seeing that. Because there's many places around the world where there's that part, whether it's Delhi, whether it's the Middle East, where it's like you grow up in these really harsh situations and really unequal situations, and you kind of have to deal with it. And they don't even know any better. Like they don't know what life is like for us. Like we don't have that type of difference. It's pretty striking in terms of like their universe versus our universe.
Yeah, I guess it's part of. I remember I was talking to a Nepali girl, and she was reading the book, and she said, "Wow, yeah, she kind of felt like she had seen the place that she knows through a fresh set of eyes, because she would just go there and she said, yeah, this is normal, this is life. But reading through it, through the pages of how we were seeing it, she said, wow, okay, I can kind of start to understand more of where you're coming from by how you were perceiving, that experience there.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Well, maybe you can tell us a little bit about the journey from Kathmandu into those remote villages, and how the saga kind of morphed from one of searching for the mountain to one of establishing a connection with a family in one of those remote villages, which we'll learn a lot more about in a second here.
Yeah, for sure. So we spent, it took us about a week to get to this little outpost village called Fu, which is kind of the most remote outpost village in the entire valley. There's two villages, Fu and Nar. And from there, that was kind of my staging ground in terms of trying to find this pyramid mountain and potentially climb it. And so we got there to this village. I mean, first of all, getting there, it it felt like we were stepping back into another era. It felt like we were time travelers going back to the
Mm.
1700s or something like that. The way that the people were living there was the same way that they've been living for the last 800 years. And the clothing, the richness of how they were living in terms of their homes, and it was just totally mind blowing. And the other thing about this valley is that it's considered a Bayul, which is a Tibetan word for a sacred valley. And the Dalai Lama has said that Bayul is a place where the physical and spiritual realms coalesce closer
Mm.
together. And so I remember very distinctly, we walked through this one gate into this part of the valley, and it was like I had walked into another realm. The colors were sharper, the feeling was different. And even Eric, the Polish professor we were with, he started, just tears started streaming from his eyes. He said, he just felt like he didn't deserve to be there. And Chantal, who had gone through these, she suffered from these migraine attacks leading up to that point, and she gets migraines from time to time, but she felt like she had one of the lowest lows of her life prior to that. And then just going through the gate, she said to me, now she feels like she's having one of the highest highs of her life.
Mm.
So it was just a very magical place going in there. And then when we got to this village of Fu, I spent the next 2 days doing reconnaissance and trying to find this mountain, and we found it. And when I was getting ready to try and climb it, that's when everything started falling apart. We got caught in a snowstorm at 17,000 feet, my two Sherpa companions and me, and my gear bags with my climbing gear, the mule that was carrying it took off. It was lost, and it was a couple of days
God.
behind us now. And so all of these things started happening, and it forced me to hunker down in this little village. And I was there for several days, just trying to understand what was happening. Why, at the very edge of trying to achieve this dream that I've had for so long, why was it being crushed before my eyes? And I was going through this kind of identity crisis. But what was also happening was that I started connecting with the locals. And one of the locals who I connected with, his name is Sonam Dorje. And Sonam Dorje, he had left this village when he was 14 years old to go get an education in India. And he had just come back. This was the first time he had been back in 7 years. 7 years, he hadn't seen his family. He hadn't seen his village. And our paths just happened to cross at that exact moment. And Sonam Dorje, we became friends over those few days, and we'd start to go on these walks together. Every day we'd take another walk, and he'd share with me about the village and about the culture and his people, and Tibetan Buddhism, and just the challenges of the village. And one day we went up to this monastery this hilltop monastery that was overlooking the entire valley, and it was just a very profound experience in terms of understanding the plight of how hard of a life it is out there, and what the struggles are, and even the struggles of kids trying to get education. And so all this was happening, and these conversations, and it kind of made me think about the climb, like, why am I so struggling about trying to climb this thing when there are much bigger issues here at play, right? But I was still internally, I wasn't quite aligned yet. And anyway, because I didn't climb the mountain, we had 2 extra days to spend in this other little village called Nar. And so I thought, okay, well, let's go check that out. When we got to Nar, we learned that there was a little school. And up until that point, there was no signs. I mean, there was an empty shell of a school and food, but it wasn't being used, and kids were just kicking cans around. And everything I had talked about with Sonam Dorje, I had learned there. But Nar had a little active school. So I thought, we should go have a look at that. And we get there, and there's this little 7-year-old girl teaching English numbers to this group of kids ranging from about 3 to 7 years old. And she's up at the head of the class. The kids have brought the benches out into the light and the warmth of the sun, because inside the classroom, there's no electricity. It's too dark and cold in there. So there they were in this courtyard, and this little girl teaching with such confidence and poise, as though she was teaching in a university auditorium or something. And I just thought, wow, there's something markedly different about her. We had seen hundreds of kids up until that point, but for some reason, there was something different about her, and I couldn't really explain it. But yeah, the kids eventually they caught sight of Michael's guitar, a musician. He had his guitar slung over his shoulder, and they'd never seen a guitar, let alone heard one before. So they were you could tell the kids were kind of anxious to have some music there. And the teacher, we found the teacher. He was kind of looming in the back of the class, and he sort of expressed to us that he was not really wanting to be there, and he was far away from his own village. He had been sent there because it was a little government school that probably scratched the surface of grade 1, but he was sent there from far away, and so was about 2 weeks away from his own people, his own village, his family. And so he kind of told us how he felt like he had been banished to the end of the earth, sort of thing. And so he kind of welcomed us. He said, yeah, play some music, and kind of pass the time.
Right.
And so Michael, the entertainer he went up there and started teaching the kids this jazzed up rendition of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. And the kids, I was kind of thinking, how are these kids going to call? I mean, Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star is a pretty simple tune on its own, but when you start throwing in these jazzed up melodic twists and turns, but they caught on, and the kids were just getting right into it. And they were getting so excited with Michael playing his guitar. And then I guess it motivated this teacher a little bit. And he brought out this traditional Nepali drum, and he wanted the kids then to dance in front of us. He wanted each kid to dance in front of us one at a time. And he started with this little girl who was so confident in teaching the numbers before. He said, to her, like, dance now in front of these people. And you could see that she was just totally mentally breaking down. She was standing there like a petrified little animal in the corner, and almost internally crying. And Chantal, she was standing next to me. She just couldn't take it, and she just marched up there next to the little girl and started doing her best impression of this Nepali dance, her arms waving in the air and everything. Yeah. And the little girl forgot about all the people watching, and all of a sudden her eyes just became fixated on Chantal, and Chantal was fixated on her, and Chantal was trying to ask the little girl, no, you teach me how to dance. And the little girl was trying to copy Chantal's improvised moves. And it was just a beautiful scene in front of these, snow-capped 7,000 meter peaks. And it just almost felt like time stopped moving in that moment when they were just up there. And then after their school got out, they found where we were staying, and this little girl, she came rushing in, just running in, and just leaped into Chantal's arms, gave her the biggest heart-to-heart hug. Mm-hmm. And then she turned to me, and she just leaped into my arms, and I'll never forget the force that hit me. Not the force of her, like her physical weight, but just the force of the love that just came rushing and just hit me right in the heart. And actually, it was in that moment that I thought, this is the reason why I'm not climbing the mountain. And then her friends came running in, and they were asking for chocolate and candy because they're used to seeing some of the trekkers bring that in now. But the little girl, she kind of stepped back, and when they were done, we didn't have any candy. She came back, and she pulled out of her sweater this little this little card with English words on it. And she just kind of motioned to Chantal to teach her these English words.
Right.
And that's when Chantal and we looked at each other and we just thought, wow, here's this little girl in this village, 14,000 feet in the middle of the mountains, materially has very little, doesn't want any chocolate. All she wants is to learn. And so that's when we started asking the questions, what happens to the children out here? What happens to children who want, to have more of an education beyond what they would learn in the village, and to see more of the world, and we started asking everyone we could, about that, and learned many things that day. We actually ended up meeting Karma because we wanted to meet with her parents and just say, hey, what's the plan for? And we asked the little girl what's her name, and she said her name is Karma. And so we wanted to meet with the parents, and we said, we wanted to ask them what's the plan for Karma, and what happens to her, this bright little girl who wants to learn. And so we went into we found their home. Karma kind of brought us in by the hand, and her mom was still working in the fields, and her father was out herding the yaks. He was 2 days away. But
Wow.
So it was just Karma there. And if you can imagine, she brought us into this little stone building with a little dung fueled stove in the middle. And she put out the mats for us to sit on. And she started the fire going. She put the tea kettle on. She was doing all this while taking care of her 3-year-old sister. And I was looking at this scene. I'm like, where else would this happen? And then her mom came home and had been working in the fields for probably, 12 hours, and very graceful woman, very, very, very weathered, very hardworking. You could see the elements had taken their toll on her, but just very beautiful and very graceful in her own way. And immediately started making us tea, and we couldn't speak each other's languages, but we had one of our Sherpas there, and he was able to translate, broken translation. We kind of gathered that, that education for them is the biggest blessing that they could ever hope for and ask for. And so we asked Karma, we said, is this something you would like? And Karma said, yeah, very much so. She would like to study. And so we said, okay, well, for as long as Karma would like to study, we will help work with your parents and find a suitable solution for you to study. And then we left the village, and we had no idea if Chantal and I, we were kind of on the long trek back, and we thought, what just happened?
Yeah.
I don't even
Karma's
know
probably thinking the same thing too. It's like, what? Was he an angel?
Exactly. Yeah. It's like, oh, and we didn't even know where to look. We got back to Kathmandu. We started looking for schools. We knew that the school had to be somewhere safe, right? That it had to be a boarding school. And we also knew that it had to be culturally aligned with Karma, because up in the mountains they're more kind of Tibetan in heritage, right? Whereas most of Nepal is more kind of Hindu. So we knew that that whatever school we found, it should be sort of culturally aligned to her. And so we were looking around Kathmandu, couldn't find anything. We got back to Canada, kept searching. I think it was for almost a month we were searching and almost losing hope. But eventually what happened was, Chantal, one late night, this school pops up called the Sri Mangal-Dip boarding school for Himalayan children. And on the front page, there were pictures of, kids in kind of raggedy clothes, unraveling at the sleeves, and just sunburnt kids that looked like the kids we saw in Karma's village. And it said, education for the lost children. They called it the lost children of the Himalaya. And we thought, oh, this is perfect. We said, okay, who started this school? It was started by this Tibetan Lama who fled Tibet in the 1950s. And he started this school specifically to cultivate the education for these kids in the mountains who are just so far out there, they just fall through the cracks. They get forgotten about. And so that's why he started the school, to kind of give them the secular education, but at the same time cultivate the Buddhist Dharma, right? Their heritage. And we thought, okay, this is perfect. So we contacted the school director at once. We said, we have the perfect student for your school, this bright girl. She was really eager to study. And we told her the story. And then the school director wrote back, and she said, thank you for sharing, and beautiful story. I have to tell you though, that our school we're just busting at the seams. We have 500 kids at the school. We have 400 kids on the wait list. We have kids being dropped off on the stairs that we have to turn away. And because of all this, there's only one person who can admit kids into this school, and that is this 80-plus-year-old founder, this Tibetan Lama. And I just felt like, oh my God, like, why are there so many barriers stacked against this one little girl who just wants to learn? But then Chantal had put our address in the email signature, and the school director said, but I see you're in Vancouver in Canada, and you may be interested to know that this Tibetan Lama right now is recovering from an illness at his monastery in this place called Richmond, which was a 25-minute drive from our home.
Wow. Serendipity.
I thought the whole journey brought us right back to where we started. And I just couldn't have made that up, and he wasn't seeing anyone, but we were able to see him and explain the story and explain about karma. And he said, okay, this was back in 2013. He said, 2012. He said, okay, the school is full this year, but next year, 2013, karma can be admitted into the school. And so Chantal and I, we've been going back every 8 to 10 months. After that, we brought karma to her first day of classes at the school. We've been going back every year to just spend time with karma and her little sister Pemba, who eventually got into the school as well, and their family. And I've just been growing basically we've become family with them, and kind of co-parenting the girls and trying to figure out a way where we can work with their parents so that the girls have choice in the world, while at the same time they don't lose touch with where they're from and their cultural values.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And how would you say the cultural values of those remote villages, those nomadic villages, or just Nepal writ large differ from the cultural values of the West?
I think a lot of it is in the details. It's in the way of thinking, of being, particularly in the mountains. There isn't this sense. I know in the West or in North America, we generally have this idea of, okay, we have to work towards objectives or goals, or, we need to achieve this. And then once we achieve that, then we can achieve the next goal, and then the next, and then the next. So we're always kind of looking ahead, right? And we put all these pressures and expectations on ourselves a lot of times, in terms of the life we should be having, or what we should be doing with our life, in terms of, what defines success and all these things. And whereas in the mountains, well, where they come from, it's very much about survival. It's about, do we have enough harvest to survive the winter? They're not thinking about, a year later or 2 years in advance or 5 years down the road, right? They're thinking about more on a month-to-month or day-to-day or week-to-week basis. And they take time, right? They don't even wear watches. I remember when we lived up there with them, we went back, and the longer we spent there, I just remember the more I stopped looking at my watch, until eventually I wasn't even looking at the time anymore. I would kind of fall into the rhythm of just the flow of what was happening at a given time of the day. And it wasn't about being somewhere or, thinking ahead, or it was just about being present to that moment. And there's lots of stories around I can share. I mean, I remember one time the girls, eventually they came here for a year on cultural exchange, which we can talk about. But I remember one time, which by the way, was just totally mind blowing. I mean, for all of us, for Chantal and me and the girls. I mean,
all of a sudden your parents.
Yeah. We're just, by the way, that's a whole other conversation. We can have instant parents. But yeah, I remember one time we were rushing around we were late for something, and I said to the girls, girls, we got to get our shoes, we got to get our jackets, we got to go, we're late. And I can't remember what it was, but I remember Pemba, she was 10 years old at the time, and she grabbed my arm and she said, Mike, if we behaved like this in our village, everybody would think that we are sick. And I just thought, wow, you know what? You're right. Let's just stop. Let's just breathe. We don't need to panic like this. We don't need to get into this kind of anxiety. So things like that. I remember actually one of her two best friends, interestingly enough, were both indigenous when she came here. And the mother of one of her friends said to me at one point, she said, none of my daughter's friends have ever truly seen my daughter until Pemba, became friends with her. And I just thought, wow, like that's a sense of, presence, mindfulness, empathy. Yeah,
compassion.
totally.
Yeah.
Compassion. And
For a
exactly,
10-year-old.
Exactly, like the level of, and another teacher, Karma, she loves teaching. So sometimes she would go in and into the kindergarten class there they were at the Waldorf school. And I remember the kindergarten teacher saying to me once, she said, just by Karma being in the classroom, the kids are just calm. I mean, things like that. So, it's in the detail, but it's also just in the energetic vibration of who they are and who these mountain people are and what they're cultivating, right? In the West, we cultivate this mindset of kind of rush and future living and goals and expectations, whereas there it's more about, let's live more fully in this present moment.
Yeah, even the way you were describing how they treated you as guests, where you're not allowed to clean, you're not allowed to do any of the cooking. So even if they spent 12 or 14 hours in the fields, they're going to come back and do everything. I think that's a striking difference in terms of culture. And as I was reading your book, I was completely gripped by, the adversity, like the stories of adversity that you went through and that the generations have gone through. But I'm telling you that when you had that paragraph about how you forgot about time, that's where it all clicked for me, because it just clearly showed that time doesn't exist. All that exists is the event. So when you were describing that and the way that Karma was hugging you, it was like heart to heart, and you just felt that, I bet you had no idea what day it was. But the event, right, that you were able to describe in such detail was that for me is when this whole entire book clicked. And I'm like, we have to have this guy on because he's proving that time doesn't exist.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I think moments, you think about what is life, right? I mean, life is just a culmination of moments, and some moments, exactly like you said, may last a second or a half a second, but they live with us for an eternity. And if we are living life in such a sort of rushed or futuristic way where we're just kind of where we have the blinders on and we're just working towards these expectations, or we're kind of oppressed by mental anxiety or fears, we can miss those little moments, right? When we miss those little moments, we miss out on a big part of life, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the detail that you included of Nepali families, at least in those villages, tending to eat together in silence really brought it home for me. Like the difference between gathering around a table with your family and eating for 30 minutes in silence versus the Western way of doing it, which I imagine has cell phones out and sort of scattered chatter and people thinking about what they're going to do after dinner or what they're going to do tomorrow. It's just such a different way of spending time together.
For sure, yeah, and how I find how the community, they kind of come together, right? It's not like this individualistic mindset that we have over here. That's one of the major differences I started to notice as well. How their culture sort of fosters this community mindset versus here we tend to be more individualistic, right? And it transcends all kinds of different things. Even another simple example, when they were here, Karma and Pemba, they, for them, like chores wasn't really a thing. They came into the household and they didn't know, they'd never seen an electronic washer and dryer or a stovetop induction, or
Right.
all these electronic things, but they immediately said, okay, how they wanted to become part of the household, right? They started just doing things, washing their own clothes, like cleaning their own things, like it wasn't like, okay, we had to tell them all that stuff, right? And because they're so used to it, that's just their way of looking at things. And I remember one time, when the girls were here, Pemba was, she was with me in the kitchen. I was making dinner, And I said, "Oh, Pemba, you don't have to help me today. Just, go and have fun, or, go and create art, or whatever you want to do. Go and play." And she just looked at me. She said, "Why don't you want me to help you?" And I thought, you know what? Let's cook. Let's come here.
Yeah.
So,
Don't take that personally.
Exactly. Yeah. But again, it was kind of that different mentality, right? They looked at it like, okay, they're part of something. They're contributing towards something, right? As simple as making a meal, and that's part of the, like you said. I mean, that's part of the relationship. This whole, not only the act of eating together, but preparing the meal together was part of life.
Yeah. One thing that struck me reading this was, growing up in North America, a lot of us have been told, like, get a grip. When you're kind of like doing your own thing, people tell you, get a grip on reality, like, get a grip of yourself. As I'm reading this book, I'm thinking to myself, it's time to tell people to loosen their grip. How about you loosen your grip on what you think reality is, on what you think your plan is, on what you think you should be achieving? Because the reality is that there's like a higher order here at play. And this is all about just having the courage to just take that next step. So as I was reading your book, I was thinking, like, maybe we should just loosen our grip on what we think reality is in our head. And it's like, no, how about we expand ourselves and be more open to what's going on out there, and be more open to being kinder and, a gentler human being, as opposed to like me, or I need that shirt, or I need that car. So that's what was striking to me. It's like, let's loosen our grip on what we think is reality.
Yeah, I think that's a huge point. And absolutely. I mean, if I would have been so fixated on climbing the mountain and tried to force it through, I mean, I wouldn't have even gone to Nar. Like, I would never have even met Karma. I mean, um, so I think, like you said, I mean, life is about tapping into these finer tuned signs. And I think there's a natural rhythm to things. I mean, I think there's a natural flow to the way our world works. And if we can be present to that, not be blinded by expectations or what we think we should be doing, then we can suddenly open up and be tuned into these finer details of, okay, what constitutes a meaningful experience? What constitutes a deep
Exactly.
relationship or a deep conversation, or, the depth of living, right? Rather than, oh, I just got to accumulate summits, so to speak. That's not life. That's just collecting a series of. If you think about what is a success? A success is a moment in time, but the depth of something, I mean, that is living, right? That defines who we become. So if we
Right.
focus more, I think, on the depth of living, the depth of the present moment, rather than just trying to get to some success of something, I think that can kind of nurture this a much more rich experience of life.
Yeah, and one last thing I'll add to that, because that was beautiful, is that let's also just be more open around being more adventurous. So, right, you're going into these hidden sacred valleys and throughout the Himalayas, and some of these places have held secrets for hundreds of years. And it's like, there's so much mystery, but that's also where there's so much to grow from.
Yeah. Actually, it reminds me of this book, Jared Diamond's book, "The World Until Yesterday." He talks about how basically we've lived a certain way for thousands of years, but the world as we know it, the modern world, has only existed for a blink of the eye. And yet this is what we think is normal, but it's actually not.
Right.
How we've survived over tens of thousands of years, we've been living a very different way. So it's just something interesting to keep in mind as we move forward, and as we progress. Let's not forget about what helped us get here as a human race, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think the other thing too that really made me reflect on my own life was just hearing about the problems of the communities in these remote villages, the fact that, they're not getting much support from the government. When kids leave to pursue education elsewhere, a lot of times they don't come back, and those cultures, as a result of that, sort of wane over time. And I think you're forced to look at your own life more humbly when you encounter other people's problems. And I think even more so when you encounter other people's problems that you didn't even know existed. Like, I didn't know anything about the people in these remote villages, and just realizing that at this very moment, they're going through that right now. They're going through that right now. They're going through that as I was reading it. It was just sort of like, wow, I need to kind of get out of my own little world, especially amid COVID right now, where so many people are spending time, inside in small spaces. I think trying to kind of broaden your mind and remember there are billions of other people on the planet right now going
Mhm.
through very unique challenges. It's just broadening.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful observation, because it's really in taking the time to try and understand others. I found that I can actually better understand myself. So
Yeah.
by taking the time, listening, having the empathy, having the compassion, um, yeah, taking the time trying to understand others has opened up my eyes to understanding better myself.
Mm.
Totally. That's another thing. I mean, when I was reading this, it was what you were doing was so noble, right? You're offering to give these two girls education, and taking on all that burden. And we joked about like becoming parents overnight. I mean, that's something that we definitely talk about. But it's funny because in this book, you were doing all these things and you were finding joy whenever you saw joy in those little girls' faces. And
Mm,
I couldn't help but think of the Buddhist word mudita, which is that feeling of I'm going to find joy in myself when I see joy in others.
right.
And so that was a thread throughout the reading for me.
Yeah, no, and it just happened over and over and over again. I remember when the earthquakes hit in 2015, thousands of people died in Nepal. The school was rendered unsafe, or the school buildings, so they had to sleep outside for months and under these big tarpaulins, and had to do their classes under like these tin roofs, and you'd have the water rushing by and floods and mud and everything, and one of the pipes up the road burst and it flooded the entire schoolyard of raw sewage, and so the kids had to shovel buckets out. Just kind of it raises that awareness again of, okay, not all of life lives as we live here,
Hmm.
and seeing the kids kind of work together, and they did it without complaining or without having any sort of negative emotions around it, just working together. That again, that kind of opened my eyes as well, and then I remember we went back right after the earthquakes, and we're getting new shoes for Carmen Pemba, because the shoes, just after a monsoon season, the shoes just nothing out of material survives the monsoon season out there.
Mm.
And we just passed this stand, selling fruit. The guy was selling some bananas, and the kids just like looked up at the bananas like with big eyes, because they hadn't had a piece of fruit like that in months. And I just thought, wow, like, okay, let's get them a couple bananas. I said to the owner there, I said, I've got two little princesses with me. I need two bananas for these fine two little princesses. And
Yeah.
and he like plucked them as though he was plucking jewels off something. I don't know. And he just gave them, and the way that they enjoyed it, it was just yeah, it was just so beautiful. And I think, to your point, yeah, that seeing them experience joy like that, um, just opened up a much deeper joy within myself.
Hmm. Absolutely.
That earthquake part was one of the saddest part, just because you find out that like temples that were built in the third century were just completely leveled. And so again, when I'm reading something like that, it's like, dude, you're not even guaranteed tomorrow. Like you're thinking that life is not going to change. You think that everything's going to be the same tomorrow, and things can change in a second. So why would I ever be afraid to take the chance to like go ask for a raise or go ask for promotion, or go say what's on my mind or raise the critical issues? Like, why am I afraid to do that when it's just a chance that tomorrow even arrives? And then if it arrives, something like that can happen, and all of a sudden something that's been standing from the third century is completely wiped away.
For sure,
So
yeah.
temporary, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, and I think it goes back to the beginning of our conversations, tapping into those higher sensory experiences is what, again, that's what being human is really about. If I think about the mountain analogy again, not being comfortable, not being sort of relegated to living in a box of fear, right? No, it's about embracing the unknown. It's about being out there, about practicing and habituating those senses, so that we can make better decisions. And I remember the one time I didn't do that, it resulted in a very devastating and tragic accident in the mountains, which I talked about in the book,
Hmm.
where where we were going out to climb this mountain, and I had this inkling something wasn't sitting right. This was the night before, and even Chantal said, "What's going on, Mike? what's off? And she could tell, something was off. And I said, I don't know. I thought maybe it would go away the next morning. I woke up, it didn't go away. And I met with my two friends. We started hiking up. It was a mountain I was intimately familiar with, just a beautiful scene and not overly technical, but we started up this glacier. And I remember as soon as I put my foot on the glacier, those warning signals came off so strongly. And I said to them, listen, I'm out, guys. I don't know what's going on, but I'm just going to sit here. I'm happy to sit here if you guys want to keep going. And they were suddenly kind of spooked. They're like, "Oh, Mike, what are you seeing?" And they were kind of looking around. Is there some sort of danger that they weren't detecting? But I couldn't articulate what I was feeling. And so we kind of logically came to the decision, well, let's just go for 5-10 minutes and then we'll reassess. And so we were making our way up this glacier. And I remember getting to the steepest part of it where the ice started to kind of fold onto the rock. And, I was kicking in with my front points and comfortable. It was terrain that I was familiar with. But these two other guys started coming up behind us. And I'll never forget, one of them slipped, started going down the glacier. He fell about 250 meters before he came to a stop. And I just thought, I looked to my friends and they looked like they had just seen a ghost, and I called down to the guy, "Are you okay?" And somehow miraculously he was okay. And so I thought, okay, I just got to keep moving. And then within about 30 seconds, the other guy slipped and started rocketing down, and his I think his crampons caught in the ice. He flipped forward, went face first right into a boulder, and just started tumbling like a marionette down. And so we had to go down. We performed first response, first aid, and it was just a totally awful scene. The blood was everywhere. His face was cracked open, and trying to hold his head together so he wouldn't choke on his blood. And anyways, it was just that to me was a very strong moment, because I just thought, wow, I had these warning signals. I couldn't explain them, but they were deeply embedded into my sense of being, and I didn't listen to them. And how often, like you said, Arjun, like how often do we not listen to them? Do we not, have the courage to take that action or to speak up or whatever it may be? And I think every time we ignore them, not only do we kind of like deaden that sense, but we put ourselves and others in a position of risk in some way. And that risk may not be present right away, like it was in this scene, but over time, I think it can have compounding impacts on ourselves and the people around us and the communities around us.
In a way, you're like rejecting the signs from the universe. And so, I mean, that's something larger than us.
Totally. Yeah.
And it's really interesting the way you say dead in the sense. Whereas if you do listen to it, the signal gets louder and louder and louder over time.
For sure. I think the more we practice kind of tapping into those, unique frequencies, again, it's part of being human, something that's evolved over many, many years, thousands of years. And the more we practice tapping into that, the more we actually are in tune with ourselves and our environment and can make better decisions.
Mm-hmm. Well, one last question I was going to ask you, Mike. Where are you right now with Karma and Pemba? How are they doing? When's the last time that you and Chantal have been in touch with them? Would love to get an update there.
Yeah, for sure. So because of COVID, the school in Nepal has had to close down. All the schools in Nepal have had to close their doors for now. And so the girls have gone back to their village, and they're actually staying in a settlement just down from the village where they have internet access. And so the school, SMD school, Sri Mangal school, they're offering online learning. So the teachers are still giving classes over the internet, which is great. So the kids can still have the education there. And yeah, they're loving it. Pemba, she wrote a piece for homework the other day. She just shared with me about, the piece was called "What I Learned During Lockdown." And what she said was, what I learned during lockdown was how much my parents love me. Wow. Because she said, being back in the village, she left the village when she was 6 years old. So she said, even though she's from the Himalaya, she didn't really see the hardships of what it means to survive up there. And she said, since she's been back in lockdown, she has learned how to look after the animals. She's learned how to cook for herself. She's learned how to survive up there. She's learned how to look after her siblings. And she said she understands now that, her parents have extreme hardship to survive, and that they don't want they don't want her and Karma to have the life that they have, which is why you know, they wanted to have the education. And so I just thought, wow, for a 12-year-old to come into that kind of awareness is pretty amazing. I mean, they've had so many amazing experiences in this since they've been back. Carmen, she was telling me about how they were bringing in their goats, and the two of them, the goats started acting funny. They came around a corner, and the snow leopard was dragging a goat up the cliffside. Oh. and so the girls, they were trying to scare the snow leopard away, and the snow leopard ended up dropping the goat. And anyway, Pemba said she was really sad because the goat died. But I'm just like, wow, I could not have really given you that experience over here.
Yeah. Because meanwhile, kids here are like playing video games inside, and
exactly. You're right. And I remember hearing this interview once where it was with the father, and the father said, one of the best gifts we can give our kids is the gift of resilience. And that kind of has a whole new meaning to me now. And I think, I feel some part of me feels very blessed for the girls, because, they were born in the village. They got down to Kathmandu. They had the learning there. They came over here, got to see, what this part of the world looks like. And then they're now back in the village with those lenses and can kind of synthesize those ideas now, which is pretty amazing.
I'd be interested to know like how many people they told about their experience and got all these other kids riled up of like, hey, there's a family in Canada that does this for you. And then, like, were there more requests, or like, I mean, I know with COVID it's super hard. Maybe that's like what put all this to pause. But I mean, I'm sure more kids wanted to do what they did.
Well, yeah, I think it's a very complex question. When we were back there in 2017, some of the villagers did ask us, why did we choose these two girls? Why can we help their kids, right? And I didn't really think about it until they asked me, but it wasn't really like we went there, okay, I want to help these two kids. It was just kind of this coming together, right? It was a culmination of all the choices that were already made, that were leading to that one point. It was all
spontaneous connection, kind of.
Exactly. Yeah. We couldn't have planned for that. It was, who Karma and Pemba's parents are and how they raised their girls. It was who Chantal and I are together, and everything that we went into to get to that point, and the mountain, and how I went through the identity crisis. And, had we been parachuted right into the village without all of that, I don't know that we would have acted in that way. Right.
Wow.
So, so it was just kind of like this whole coming together through all the little incremental choices and decisions that were made over time. And so some villagers, I guess they kind of wonder about that. And other kids, they definitely do think about having the experience, being able to come to another country. And at the same time, they don't necessarily know what it's like to make it here, right? Some of them think, oh, okay, once I get to North America, life is set. But no, actually it's not. It's, there's other mental pressures. There's, there's one Nepali girl who we kind of were her host parents. She got a scholarship to finish her grade 11 and 12 over here. And now she got a scholarship for university. She wants to her dream is to become a doctor. She's doing her pre-med right now. And she grew up in a place where she would watch kids go off with their backpacks to school, thinking to herself, why can't I, go to school? And so she's kind of defied the odds, and she's gotten these scholarships now. But I remember we were having a conversation over the holidays, and she said, she's like, Mike, I think I'm becoming more individualistic, like less compassionate by being here, because again, it's not that community mindset. She's having to really take care of herself. And I said, no, it's actually, well, maybe, but you got to go back to your intention. Like, why is it that you're wanting to do what you're doing? You're wanting to do what you're doing because your dream is to become a doctor so you can help people. So I think that's actually a very, noble thing, even though you're having to look after yourself right now, so to speak. But yeah, so I think it's a different way. We don't know what we don't know, right? And some kids who come over here, or some kids here who go over there, it just opens, new perspectives in ways that we can't really imagine.
Well, the book is A Story of Karma, Finding Love and Truth in the Lost Valley of the Himalaya. Incredible read. There's so much in there that we didn't have the chance to cover. So I really encourage you to buy it, you to read it, you to review it. And Mike, thank you so much for being on the show with us.
Yeah, thank you, gentlemen. I really appreciate the time.
Mike, thank you for your presence.